and it hits me, oh my gosh, this is that triangle.
You know, there's explanation for everything that occurred in the Rendlesham Forest incident that doesn't involve aliens at all.
It was completely silent. It comes right over our heads.
He saw a classic flying saucer, really, standing in the clearing.
He turned over to my father and held his hand, and he looked in his eyes, and he said, "We're not alone."
Welcome to Podcast UFO for our live show. We're live every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on the Dark Matter Radio Network. Please remember to visit the website podcastufo.com for past episodes, blogs, and forums. During the show, feel free to participate live in our chat room. And don't forget to like us on our very active Facebook page.
Well, hello and welcome to the show here on the Dark Matter Radio Network. I'm Martin Willis, your host, and we're coming at you live from the top of a mountain in Maine. How do you like that? It's our first show out of our mountain office. We have another great show for you tonight, and Andy Fleming is coming up in a minute with a segment called Neutron Stars. Our guest tonight is Matty Beckerman. He is the director of a recent movie, Alien Abduction. It's basically based on the ongoing sightings and purported abductions in North Carolina, otherwise known as the Brown Mountain Lights. I guess I go back several years. Hey, our past guest, senior astronomer Seth Shostak, is currently in a tizzy. Could Kepler 186f be Earth's twin? It's 500 light years away, yet SETI is pointing their telescope array toward it to see if they can find a radio signal. So far, this is the closest twin to Earth that has been found. And you can read the story. It's on the Huffington Post through our show notes at podcastufo.com. Well, without further ado, here is our clip with Andy Fleming, and coming right up after our guest, Matty Beckerman.
And hello, Martin and listeners. Now, in the past few weeks, we've talked about the lives of stars and their deaths. The latter often result in bizarre objects called white dwarfs or black holes. But there's another weird outcome as well for high-mass stars, and that is so-called neutron stars, discovered by Jocelyn Bell in 1967 at Cambridge University. Now, once the core of a massive star starts burning iron, energy production stops and the core collapses, squeezing electrons and protons together to form neutrons. Now, the density is equivalent to that of an atomic nucleus. At this point, the neutrons occupy the smallest space possible, and if the core is less than 3 solar masses, they exert what is known as neutron degeneracy pressure. Now, this is still capable of supporting a star, and if its magnetic field is favourably aligned with its spin axis, it appears as a neutron star. Neutron stars are extreme objects and have a radius of about 15 kilometres. A teaspoon of one would weigh around 1 billion tonnes. If you imagine squeezing twice the mass of the sun into an object the size of a city, that's what we're talking about. Hence, gravity at the surface of the neutron star is 1,000 times stronger than the Earth's, and an object would have to travel at about half the speed of light to escape from it. Now, the Crab Nebula and Pulsar is such an object, first noted by Chinese astronomers way back in 1054 AD. Such neutron stars rotate extremely rapidly, and if they're part of a binary system, that can reach over 600 times per second. Astronomers measure these rotation rates by detecting electromagnetic radiation ejected through the poles of the magnetic field. These magnetic poles are generally misaligned with the rotation axis of the neutron star, and so the radiation beam sweeps around as the star rotates. Now, this is much the same as the beam of light from a lighthouse sweeping around. If the Earth lies in the path of the beam, we see the neutron star and pulsar. If not, we see only the supernova remnant. Neutron stars do not necessarily exist in isolation, and those that form part of a binary system usually emit strongly in the X-ray waveband. X-ray binaries typically result from the transfer of material from a main sequence companion onto the neutron star itself. Short-duration gamma-ray bursts are thought to result from the merger of two neutron stars.
Well, thanks as always, Andy. It's always a pleasure. And, this just made me think of something. A lot of times they talk about the way atoms are and that they could be squished down so far. As a matter of fact, I guess a person, if all the space was taken away between the electrons in an atom, would be so tiny you couldn't even see it. And I'm wondering if that's what happens when, a star collapses, if the atoms get squished somehow closer and closer. And I heard somewhere where a sugar cube, just a sugar cube size that you'd put in your coffee or your tea, of a black hole would weigh as much as every single car in the United States, which this stuff is just mind-blowing, if you ask me. Well, it's time to pull up your chairs around your computer, like they did in the old days around the radio. Get yourself a hot spot of tea, and join us in the chat room at Podcast UFO as I welcome our guest. How are you, Matty?
Terrific. Thank you so much for having me, Martin.
Yes, thanks, and thanks for joining us. And we, here on our podcast site, we have the trailer of this movie you have out. It's called Alien Abduction. Can you talk about the movie and what it's portraying? And it's based on some factual evidence and what's going on there and what's called the Brown Mountain Lights.
Yeah, so the Brown Mountain Lights are an absolutely real phenomenon. It dates back about 800 years to the Cherokee and Catawba Indians in North Carolina. And, I've seen the lights myself. I've taken pictures of them. I've witnessed them. And the people who I've spoken to up there that claim they've been abducted take this very, very seriously. And it's a crazy thing to see it firsthand.
And you have seen them yourself.
Yeah, I saw them myself. I actually have pictures up. If you go to alienabductionfilm.com, I have a blog that I posted of actual pictures of the Brown Mountain Lights.
Now, let me ask you something. There is a depiction of the Brown Mountain Lights, and they're like a triangle formation, which seems to be a lot of there's a lot of reports of triangular formations. But in this depiction, all of a sudden one of the lights just takes off. Is that something that someone's actually witnessed? Or
Yeah. Yeah, this is almost everything in our film is accurate to details of stories that people have told and actual footage that people have caught and videotaped. So we're trying to keep it as authentic as it possibly can be.
Wow, that's great. Now, one of the witnesses to a situation was actually starring in the film?
Well, what we did is the opening of the movie, we actually interviewed a bunch of local people who both have seen the lights their entire life and one woman who actually claimed she had been abducted. We also interviewed Joshua P. Warren, who's a famous paranormal researcher, and he's probably one of the leading experts on the lights itself. And he gives a bunch of stories and explanations on, what he believes the lights are and what his research has brought. He led a team from National Geographic up to the mountain to do some serious study. And he brought the findings to a NASA scientist, and it's unexplained completely. So we do a small documentary in the opening of the film that kind of lays the groundwork and gives the idea and the background on the history of these lights.
So these lights have actually been studied, and it's actually by more than NASA too, right?
Oh, yeah. It's been studied by the federal government on at least 3 different occasions that we know of. And there's a ton of mysterious military activity that happens throughout that little small area. it's just filled with it. And I constantly hear stories about it. I mean, personally, because I've seen the lights, I think this is bigger than Roswell. I think this is bigger than Area 51, because anyone can go there and see this phenomenon for themselves. It's right there. It's right off the highway. It's clearly marked. And, thousands of people have over hundreds of years.
Now, you're saying hundreds of years, but are there, times where there's a stretch where it happens a lot in a certain time period, say, for a year or two, and then kind of goes away and then comes back? Well,
it's pretty consistent. The best time of year to see it is during the September, October, November time period, around the fall. And that's where we actually shot the film on location, where the real lights are seen. And a lot of our crew and cast saw the lights themselves. So that's the time of year you really need to go there.
Now, I understand that a lot of different people are trying to explain them in different ways. Can you talk about that?
Sure. The first legend dates back to the Cherokee Indians. And it's said that there was a large group of Native Americans who went missing on the mountain. And it was either from a battle or something. They couldn't explain it. And the lights are supposedly the souls of these Native Americans who are still roaming the mountainside. That was the oldest known explanation from the Cherokees. Then you get back into George Washington, who that's the first known actual report, was a scout for George Washington's army. And, this predates electricity. So clearly the lights aren't man-made. And then, there's a lot of history. So then there's a very famous folk song, a bluegrass song, that was done most famously by Roy Orbison, called the Brown Mountain Lights, the legend of the Brown Mountain Lights. And, it's just covered constantly in that area of the Appalachians. And it talks about a plantation owner who goes missing around Brown Mountain. And the people who work for him go looking for him, and they go missing as well. So, these are constantly the stories. And it's not just one or two people that go missing. It's large groups. So it's not just one or two abductions at a time. It's 20, 30, 40 people.
When you say missing, do you mean permanently missing?
Some people show back up. The most common thing recently, now throughout history, people just went missing and they never showed back up. But the most common thing recently is seeing the lights, having them approach you, and then losing time and not knowing what happened. The one woman I interviewed tells a story about her, having seen the lights. She went home, walked into her house, and she was sucked up against the ceiling of her home. She then woke up in bed, fully clothed. Her husband woke up next to her and he says to her, "Oh my God, I just had the worst nightmare, that I was sucked up against the ceiling of our house." Oh. And right when that happened, their daughter comes running in the door and says, "Oh my God, where have you guys been for the past day and a half? Oh. We've been looking everywhere for you." Wow. So these are story after story after story you hear from the area.
Whenever I talk to someone about, say, a hot spot, or a place where a lot of things just happen over the years, it always makes me ask this question: why do you think that this would happen in one certain space like that?
It's tough to put your finger on it. I mean, my family have been going up to the mountains there since I was a kid. And I've always heard the stories of the Brown Mountain Lights. And, I think you go to a place like Nome, Alaska, or you go to a place like, Hesseling, where the lights are in Europe. And the remote places where there are very few people, And I think there's an operational area where they know they can enter, they can study, and they can get away with it. And I think the government knows and has been covering it up.
Yes, sometimes I go back and forth thinking about that situation myself. Now, has there been any police involvement in any of this?
Yes, completely. And I interviewed one of the sheriffs locally, and he gave me a full interview. He talked about his own experiences with the lights and having seen them chase people down the highway, and he actually was chased himself.
Really? Chased down the highway? Chased
down the highway, right on Highway 181, just outside of Morganton, North Carolina. And he actually finished the interview with me, thought twice about it, and said, I'm not going to sign this release. I feel too uncomfortable letting this information out there, that it's me. So, yeah, I've heard from police, I've heard from school teachers, I've heard from, very reputable people. I think the most telling thing was we had our premiere. We actually had it in the town of Morganton. They have a great little movie theater there. And the director of tourism from Burke County invited me and the cast to the town in order to kind of do it before everyone else. And we had about 600 or 700 local people show up in a very small town. And I asked the crowd after seeing the film, I said, how many people here have witnessed the Brown Mountain Lights? And I'm not kidding, 75% of the audience raised their hands having seen the lights.
Wow. Well, and that's probably one of the reasons they came also.
Yeah, it was. And I videotaped it on my iPhone, that entire encounter. It's up on my website. If you go to alienabductionfilm.com and the About section, I put it up there.
Now, going back to the family where the two parents were gone, were they reported as missing?
Well, the story of the movie Alien Abduction is based on a family who actually go camping up in the Brown Mountain area. They see the lights over their campsite, and from there, things go off the rails for them. And it's based on a real encounter that happened. That in the encounter that the real story, the family was over at the Brown Mountain Overlook, and one of the Brown Mountain Lights went from down in the valley right to over top of their car. They freaked out. They tried to run. The light followed them for miles, and the next thing they know, they had woken up a day later in their car on the side of the highway.
Amazing.
So that's what this is based on.
Wow. Now, as far as the movie goes itself, was this your project, something that you put together, or did you work with a writer?
My best friend and I wrote it together.
I see.
And the producers on it, Lawrence Bender and Mike Fleiss. So Lawrence Bender has produced every Quentin Tarantino movie from Pulp Fiction to Kill Bill to Inglourious Bastards. He's been Tarantino's partner on everything. I gave him the script, and he kind of flipped out over it and said he had to be involved because it's based on such true events. And then Mike Fleiss is our other producer who produced Hostel and Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And so I was just very, very lucky to find such a terrific group of people.
Wow. Now, back on the message board, someone's saying that you didn't really answer my question.
Oh.
Did the girl whose parents that claim that were missing for a day and a half, did she actually file a missing persons report?
No, she never did.
And any reason why? I would think that if your parents are missing, is that a believable story?
Well, I heard it directly from this woman. I don't think she'd have any reason to lie to me about it. After a day and a half, maybe your parents went on vacation. Maybe they went away for some reason. Who knows? Maybe they went on a bender drinking.
Yeah, it's hard to know what they were like. We don't know what their family life was like. Now, someone also on the message board is asking, when is the film released? It's released now, right?
It is. It was released on April 4th. We're currently in the top of the charts on iTunes. You can actually watch it on demand on iTunes, on Amazon, on Google Play. Right on our website, you can see where all the links are in order to check it out. But we've been really, really lucky. We actually were number 2 on iTunes, beating out Paranormal Activity for a while. I was just shocked. It was so much fun. I mean, this is a tiny independent film. We did it for a budget, and we were trying to tell a real story. And the amount of awesome feedback we've gotten and people reaching out has been just awesome. I love it.
Yes, one of the listeners, or a person that actually helps out with the show, listened to you on Coast to Coast and said, "Oh, you have to get him on." Cool. So I imagine when you were on Coast to Coast with the millions of listeners they have, that you probably saw a bit of a surge. Oh,
massive! I mean, we had a huge spike from there. And Joshua Warren actually brought me onto the show, and I can only thank him for it, because, you know, when you make a movie like this, finding a core audience of people who understand it is the most crucial thing. And that's why I love doing things like this show with you, Martin, because I feel like it's spreading a message beyond the normal mainstream public. This is the underground. This is where real people talk about things.
Yeah. Well, expect a big surge tomorrow.
Oh, well, that'd be terrific.
Well, we have someone on the message board that says she loved it. 4 out of 5 stars. And she's a hard person to please. And I know who this person is, and that's very true.
Well, I love that. That's terrific.
Yeah. So let's talk more about other things that have been going on in the place. Are there other weird things other than UFOs or whatever this is going on in the same area?
Yeah, people see a lot of things at Brown Mountain. People want to kind of attribute whatever they're going through, spiritually or physically, to things that happen on the mountain. Personally, the pictures that I put up of my experiences at Brown Mountain were energetic and really interesting. So this is going to sound so LA of me to say this. Maybe not in this crowd, but in general. I went to the overlook at Wiseman's View, which is deep in the woods, to see the Brown Mountain Lights with my wife and our friend of ours who is a shaman who trains with the Caro Indians in Peru. His name is John Rasmussen. Amazing shaman. So John we saw the lights full on, and we probably saw 9 or 10 of them. They were large. They were moving around like crazy. I got my iPhone out because I was ill-prepared and started trying to take pictures of it. And John, my shaman friend, started doing some energy work on the mountain. And the pictures are stunning. We can see clear orbs in almost every shot. There are beams of energy coming out of him, going into me. We then switched phones. My wife started taking pictures with her own iPhone, and the same phenomenon was happening there. So there's definitely an energy there. There's definitely something that people call a vortex. There's something there that is driving these lights and driving people's own experiences going to visit the area. And these are the pictures that are up on my website, by the way.
I see. Now, forgive me for being such a lay person, but what is energy work?
Well, it's basically, tapping into the energy of the earth and using that to heal and using that to do almost a soul cleansing. And I don't explain it as well as John can, clearly. And I'm generally a super skeptical guy, but the things I've seen working on this film have changed me and made me really open to things. And I think that's partially the reason I made this film, was to personally open me up to things that are kind of beyond normality.
All right. Well, when there's a lot of messages coming up on the message board, so when you're saying beams of energy, what are you actually saying? You're actually seeing like rays of? I mean, how would you describe that?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't show up in the physical. You can't see it, but on camera we were able to capture it, and it looks like a beam of white light coming out of him and projecting. And it's in. I mean, we probably took 30 pictures. It's in just about every one of them.
Okay. Now, when these things happen in an area, a lot of times people will try to explain, or science will try to explain as a natural phenomena. Have they tried and attempted to come up with reasons for these things happening there?
Oh, of course. So, scientists talk about it being swamp gas. Actually,
is there any swamps there?
There is no swamp in the area. The geologists talk about swamp gas. If you're a biologist, they talk about some natural phenomenon. If you're, the astronomer that I know likes to talk about meteorites. There are theories of ball lightning.
I hear that. You hear the ball lightning a lot.
You hear that a lot, and it's one thing to see this thing across a gorge, 700 plus feet away. It's another thing to see it directly next to you in a parking lot, and it moving around trees and moving intelligently. That's what changes people's opinions on it.
So have you actually seen what you would consider it moving intelligently?
Yes, absolutely.
And are they always in formation, or are they separate?
I've only seen them in formation, a group of them together, and everyone explains it a little differently. But picture after picture, you'll see 5 or 6 of them together, but no less than 2 or 3.
Now, can you tell me what type of geography are we having here? Is it mountain upon mountain, and this is just called the Brown Mountain area, or is this one specific mountain that all these things happen around?
Well, it's an area called the Linville Gorge, and it's close to the Pisgah National Forest, which is a massive, massive piece of North Carolina wilderness, and it happens throughout that area. But the Brown Mountain Lights specific overlooks look at the Linville Gorge. But people claim they see these lights all over the region.
Oh, I see. Mm-hmm. Now, up on the message board, there's a question. Were there ever any traces of physical evidence on any of the abductions?
Well, there's one guy who actually went out and reached out and touched one of the Brown Mountain Lights. And this is a kind of wild story that Joshua Warren tells. He went up there in the 1980s with a group of about 9 or 10 people, and Joshua has interviewed all the witnesses that saw this happen. So they went up to the overlook, this group, and the lights came up onto the overlook, and everyone went running the other direction, except for one crazy guy who decided...
Travis Walton. That's
you got it. You got it. That's what it feels like, kind of fire in the sky-esque. Walks up to the light, probably a crazy redneck, and he stuck his hand into it. And they said it went from about 5 or 6 feet in diameter and shrunk when he stuck his hand in it. And there's 2 different stories. There's one is his account directly, and then the people who are with him. In his account, it felt like he was sticking his hand in an electrical socket, and it was like shaking him. And it only lasted for 4 or 5 seconds. The people that were with him say that he was stuck like a statue for a good 10 to 15 minutes.
Wow.
And that the light dimmed around him. So physical evidence-wise, there were, he was shocked. But, a lot of these abductions that happen, there are not a lot of physical evidence. They're pretty good at keeping their tracks clean.
Now let's talk about you and your background. Have you done anything like this before, or is this like a new interest to you?
You know, I've always been fascinated with science fiction, but this is the first movie I've directed. I've produced a bunch of films before this. I produced a movie called The Experiment. It was with Adrian Brody and Forrest Whitaker. Huh. And it was about the Stanford Prison Experiment. So I guess I do gravitate towards real stories and converting them into kind of modern day things. I guess it's my thing right now.
How about the UFOs in general? Is that something that you've always paid attention to and had an open mind about?
No, I mean, I like these movies. Like, I like Close Encounters of the Third Kind. It's one of my favorite things ever. But you know, the real UFO phenomenon and things like that, I really dismissed. I didn't think it was real until I made this film, and I met people who told me their stories and were so genuine that I couldn't help but be swayed by it. And kind of, you know, I'm a skeptic initially until I get really shown things, and then I'm like, this is just obvious. You know, I had a great conversation with Jim Mars, who is author of Alien Agenda.
Oh yeah, mm-hmm.
And you know, his book starts off and it says, UFOs are absolutely real. That's a fact. Let's get past that and let's talk about the history of what's actually happened.
Right. Yeah.
It's a proven fact.
Now, here's in my opinion, is a very good circumstance for someone to take something seriously and do some research. Like, I'm trying to think of the place in Europe where there's a setup with motion activated cameras and all that. It just seems to me, if these are happening on an ongoing basis, it seems like a perfect place to actually get serious about trying to figure out what these are. However, you know, some of what you were talking about almost sounds like a possible natural phenomena of some kind, except for the part where you're actually saying that you believe they're intelligently controlled.
Yeah. Now, there's a professor at Appalachian State University named Dan Caton, and Professor Caton set up a camera that monitors the Linville Gorge 24/7.
Oh.
And you're absolutely right. So he set those cameras up, and I think it's posted on his website, which is brownmountainlights.org or .com. But there was one night in particular where over 100 lights were seen.
Wow.
So yeah, I mean, you're right on point. You know, people are definitely studying this, and especially Professor Caton at Appalachian State. You know, he's a professor of physics and astronomy, and this has been a big deal for him to kind of dig in and try to disprove it. That's his whole thing, is trying to like make sense out of it and disprove people's paranormal explanations for the lights.
Well, you're more or less calling yourself a skeptic to begin with. So I imagine this experience has kind of changed your life a little bit.
For sure. I'm definitely open to bigger things. And, you know, I talked about it briefly on Coast to Coast, and people are giving me crap about it. But I was, because I've become so open to this idea and all these things, all right, this is going to sound hokey and funny, but I'm going to say it. I was hypnotically regressed about a month ago. And in that regression, and have you talked to people who've done this before, Martin?
Let's see. Yes, but not in great detail.
Okay. Well, I was taken back into lifetime I've lived before this. And if you believe in reincarnation, which I do,
Did you believe in reincarnation before this?
Yeah, I'm kind of kind of believe in a lot of that, like, you know, Buddhism and that sort of Eastern philosophy. But I was regressed hypnotically. I went back into several lifetimes, and then I hit this point where this is going to sound insane, but I'm going to say it. Who cares? Where I was regressed into what I can describe as a higher self. There's a book called Many Lives, Many Masters, and it describes this kind of guide in your life, the master self and a higher self. And this is coming out of my mouth, so it's not someone else putting it in there. I was actually speaking it. It's one thing hearing weird things from a medium who's telling you things, and you're like, oh, that's bullshit. It's another thing hearing it out of your own voice. And I was told that I was from Pleiades, and that I was something called a star seed, and that I was meant to tell this story in order to open my mind and other people's minds to the possibilities that exist. Okay, you're quiet now. I've clearly freaked you out.
Well, I don't necessarily always have to agree or believe the same things that other people do for them to be on this show. So I let people say, to me, it's hard to buy any of that stuff. But that's I'm just a person who doesn't believe in reincarnation. And I don't believe in a lot of things. And so that's just, I'll leaving my own opinions aside. You have every right to say what you actually think happened.
I realize how insane it sounds. I completely do.
I can't understand how a regression works or what kind of mind state you're in and where things lead to this. Are these things being told to you, or how? Again, it's really hard for me to believe any of this, but are you actually thinking you're going back to past lives, or what happens?
Yeah, you physically feel it. The first incarnation I went back into, I went into it, I woke up, and I had an arrow sticking out of my neck, and I was dying.
I hate when that happens.
Doesn't you hate when that happens?
Yeah.
And what's really funny about it was that since I was a little kid, I have had this searing pain that's been in my neck forever. And I've gone to doctor after doctor. I've gotten MRIs done, and no one can explain what it is. Chiropractors, acupuncturists, just trying to stop this pain. And it's been really, really rough on me. Once I went through this regression, and once I realized, it was an arrow in my neck, and I was able to remove it, my higher self was able to get rid of it, I have not had that pain. And it's almost like a therapy in a way.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So did your mother call you a pain in the neck when you were little?
No, but she will now.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's get back to. I want to get back to the subject of UFOs, not necessarily right now,
Sure.
Brown Mountain, but so this has opened your eyes. Now, are you actually looking into other things, other situations? Has this sparked more interest, or are you just going to move on to look into something else?
This has definitely sparked more interest. I mean, think about the planet that was just found this week.
Yes.
That was so similar to Earth. And you got to think there are billions of planets out there that do have habitable areas, that are similar to our planet, that have water that doesn't either freeze or boil. And that's the zone that is habitable. You have to think that there is intelligent life out there. There is someone or something that, we're not alone. We're not the only inhabitable planet.
Yeah, I'm totally agreeing with you on that. Anyway, on that. Hey, have you heard of the Min lights? We actually have a listener from Australia that's in our chat room, and he's saying that they're very similar to the Brown Mountain lights. Have you ever heard of them?
I have, and part of my research of doing this film were not unlike those lights in Australia. There are lights all around the world that are similar, that people have seen for hundreds of years, including the Min lights in Australia.
Wow. Yeah, I've heard there's a long time ago, I heard that there was a light on a railroad track, and nobody can ever figure it out. Did you find that in your research too?
Yeah, and it was in North Carolina.
Is it really?
Not too far from Brown Mountain. I was on another show the other day, and one of the callers called in from North Carolina, and he told me a story about this railroad track, and that a light chased him down the railroad tracks and into his car, and it was almost an identical story to one I heard from a police officer on Brown Mountain.
All right, let's talk more. You said this police officer was chased.
Yeah.
And was this the same gentleman that wanted to not sign the release?
Yeah, exactly.
And
he wouldn't.
Okay. How about other police officers? Were there other police officers talking about the situation there?
Yeah. At our premiere in Morganton, we had a large group of police officers who raised their hands and had seen the lights.
Wow. And now, besides the person actually reaching up and touching one, supposedly, have people tried to track down, like a lot of times you see these lights at a distance. But I'm picturing a mountain. You can't really climb the mountain to see where they are, if that's what the situation is. Are there roads along toward where the lights are being seen?
No, it's pretty dense wilderness. The way in or out would have to be backpacking in or out. You couldn't even take an off-road vehicle, and it's too treacherous. So it's, people have definitely gone out there and done significant studies on it, including the U.S. government. One of the biggest studies it was by the U.S. Geological Survey.
Mm-hmm.
And they said it was unexplained. And then a group came out, another U.S. government group came out. I can't remember the name of them, but they had tried to explain it as a railroad that was nearby, the CSX, and that was back in the 1950s that the railroad was there.
So they were saying like the train was coming through and shining light.
Yeah, which is a crazy thing. But then there was a massive storm in the 50s, and the rail line was washed away, and people reported seeing the lights after the railway was washed away, including pictures of it. And this story actually came to me from Daniel Caton at Appalachian State University, the professor of physics and astronomy.
Now, a message up. By the way, if you're listening live on Dark Matter Radio Network, you can jump over to podcastufo.com. It's a real quick 1-2 sign in. You can use Facebook or just 2 clicks to sign in on our chat room, and you can ask our guest a question. And one has just come up right now. Is there a local MUFON near the Brown Mountains that have investigated this local phenomenon? And if so, what is their conclusion?
Joshua Warren is the closest thing to the local MUFON. You can check out his website. It's brownmountainlights.com. And he went up there with an entire crew from National Geographic, like I was talking about earlier. Yeah. And they studied it intensely. So I'm sure there's been actual MUFON there. who have reported it, but I haven't seen those reports personally.
Now, getting back to the abduction side of this, do you know approximately how many abduction claims are in that area?
Initially I thought, in the recent times there was only a few. But since I've made the movie, people have been reaching out to me left and right, saying that they've been abducted. It's hard to find these people if you're just trying to look for them because they're not going to talk about it. But being that we've made this film, we've become kind of a beacon for people to reach out and say, I've experienced this myself. Mm-hmm. And I encourage that. Come and talk to me about it. I'm not going to ridicule you. I'm not going to, tell you I don't believe you, because at this point, I absolutely do believe you.
People are more believable when they're not looking for any limelight. And a lot of times if someone is quietly contacting you, it's something to look into a little bit more.
Yeah. And the story of Travis Walton. Travis Walton, from what I know, went into hiding for close to a decade. He didn't have a phone because of the amount of ridicule he was under.
Yeah, we've had him on the show a number of times, and yes, he was tormented by the whole situation. Wish it never happened to him.
Yeah. A lot of people are like that. I mean, a lot of the abductees I talk to, a lot of them don't remember what happened to them. That's the biggest thing is they have a loss of time. They don't remember what happened. And then they have flashes of things, of seeing themselves with these gray aliens.
Now, are you talking about these abduction accounts at the Brown Mountain? Are people talking about the gray aliens there as well?
Yeah. So the first time I heard about the Brown Mountain Lights, I was a kid, and my grandparents would tell me about it. And I moved up to the Boone, Banner Elk area of North Carolina, which is very close to the lights. And I was working with my uncle at his he had this large place called the Great Train Robbery, which was like a market. And there was a guy that worked there, and I worked with him for several years. Nicest guy ever. He was a little quirky and weird. And we started talking, and he tells me this story about him seeing the Brown Mountain Lights and then being abducted. And he said years later, he started getting flashbacks and seeing, different, he almost called it like a download, where he would receive information in his sleep and then be taken back up to what he called a ship. And I didn't believe him. I thought he was nuts. And I kind of disregarded it and thought it was just some crazy guy. But I went back to make the movie and started interviewing people. And this poor guy, I tried to interview him, and he said, yes, I'll do the interview, but my wife's really upset with me about it. And I got my whole crew out. I went to go record him, and he didn't answer my calls for a good 3 days. And this is a good friend of mine. He called me back finally. He said, Matty, I'm really sorry. I just can't talk about this and be recorded talking about it. I'm afraid what it's going to do to me. And he had actually reported seeing the Greys and seeing them experiment on him, and it tormented him. Very similar to Fire in the Sky and that story.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. One of the questions that just came up on the message board: do the lights move at a really high speed, or do they kind of stay steady?
They do. They do both. First of all, they will hover, and then slowly pick up speed, and then shoot off in a direction rapidly at speeds that are beyond any human capacity.
I'd like to see them myself. I mean, that sounds great. But
I would encourage you to go do it. I mean, I went and did it myself. Most of my crew went up and did it. you can go there today. There's markers on the side of the highway saying this is where you go to watch the Brown Mountain Lights that the government put there.
Yeah. Now, we had a past guest on this show named Chase Klutsky, and she told a story of being in a place in Tennessee where this big triangular craft came over her, and the guy was expecting it because it was happening like every night. And she said before this whole thing, flew over the mall, and she was actually an investigator for MUFON. Prior to that, though, she said there were dancing lights. They were making all kinds of formations and moving all around, and it was the most bizarre thing she had ever seen. And right after that, this triangular craft just flew right overhead. Has anyone ever actually seen like a craft, or is it always just the lights?
Tons of people see the lights. And around that area, people have seen crafts. And there was a report recently, actually, while I was on Coast to Coast, there was someone who came on before me, and they were talking about a case in North Carolina where the three lights showed up into a craft, and that was also the same general area. I didn't see a craft when I was there at Brown Mountain. Most people see the lights alone, but it's dark out. It's hard to tell what's behind these things. It's just like seeing an airplane in the sky. You'll see flashing lights. You don't necessarily see the plane.
So you actually have to hike out to see this, is that correct?
There are two main spots. You can see it from just about anywhere in the general area, but there are two main spots. One is off of a major highway, Highway 181. The other one is a place called Wiseman's View, which is a hike. There's also a big marker right on the Blue Ridge Parkway. And it just says, this is where you see the Brown Mountain Lights.
Yeah. Well, that'd be nice if more places were marked. And you said earlier that, there are places like this around the world. And I do believe that. The only thing is I can never figure out why it would be. If, let's just say, an alien craft from another world is visiting us because they have that capability somehow. And this is all hypothetical. Why on earth would they show up at the exact same place over and over again? I can never understand why that would happen.
Yeah. It's a mystery for sure. Joshua Warren has a theory that it's an energy that's given off from that specific area that is drawing them in. And, there are also theories that the government actually have a set-up meeting area there. And the military is involved in it.
How close?
These are pretty wild.
Yeah. How close is the nearest military base? Do you know?
I don't know much about the military in the area. I know North Carolina is a huge hub for the military. There is a story of a local restaurant in Morganton, North Carolina, where the owners were approached by an Army colonel who asked them to feed 400 troops a day for 2 months. They agreed to it, and they drove out and delivered 400 meals a day. Not 400 meals a day, but 400 meals for, 3 meals a day. And all they saw was 2 military police who would take the meals from them and leave. And they did this for 2 months right at Brown Mountain.
How about that?
Yeah.
Wow. Now, Joshua Warren, isn't he into Bigfoot and other cryptozoological, however you say that, I always screw up that word, other crypto?
Yes, absolutely.
And is there a lot of sightings there as well?
Not as many Bigfoot sightings, but they definitely are creature sightings there. And I still equate that to extraterrestrial sightings. But there are definitely Bigfoot sightings there. There are Bigfoot sightings all over the place. Any major forest, and you'll hear a Yeti or Sasquatch or Bigfoot sightings.
Well, we've talked a number of times on the show that there's sometimes seems to be some type of relationship between people seeing UFOs and Bigfoot and ghosts. I mean, there's all these, connections, and I don't know. Sometimes you wonder if it's some type of natural energy, and some of it's mirage or what. I have no idea.
Yeah, I mean, there's a guy that claims he caught one and killed it, and he's showing pictures of it and traveling around with it in the back of his trailer.
Oh yes, but he's been busted.
Oh, he has. Okay.
Oh yes, he came clean. That it was something that he stuffed, and yep, I can't remember his name, but this was I don't know, maybe a month or so ago he came clean.
So Joshua Warren actually has on his site. There's a picture of a picture of what a local guy named Ralph Lale is calling an alien. That was a body he recovered at Brown Mountain.
Oh, how about that?
Yeah, it's so people have definitely seen this for a long time. This guy Ralph Lale, in the 1960s, had this little shop at Brown Mountain, and he would, for $45, you could go in the back room, and he would show you the mummified body of what he called an alien. And Ralph would grab a lunch pail, walk out into the woods with nothing, and what he claimed was he would then be taken on a ship and head to another planet. And he'd be gone for weeks at a time. And they said Ralph Lale said that he actually was given the body of this extraterrestrial in order to prove it to people.
Well, I'm not sure which I believe more, the regression story or that. But anyway, we're just about ready to wrap it up here. Can you give out your website and all the information about the movie real quickly?
Absolutely. It's alienabductionfilm.com. And it's and also mattybeckerman.com. You go to my personal website as well. Alienabductionfilm.com has all of the links to all the videos that I was talking of, the pictures, I was talking about the Brown Mountain Lights. The movie is on demand and available on iTunes, Amazon, Google, all of your local cable stations. You can watch it at any point right now, and we're doing really well with it.
Well, that's great. Well, thanks so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it. It was a lot of fun.
Oh, it was a pleasure, Martin. Thank you so much for having me.
You bet, and good luck with your movie.
I appreciate it.
Well, that's it for the show today. If you missed any part of the show, you can catch it as a podcast and a whole bunch of other free podcasts on our website, which is podcastufo.com. Also, you can check out our links to our stories and our show notes, as well as joining in the conversation in our forums. I want to thank everyone for helping out with the show today. Our guest, of course, Matty Beckerman. Keith Rowland, producer of the Dark Matter Radio Network. He did some extra work today. Thank you, Keith. Andy Fleming for the astronomy look. Carrie Lloyd Whitehouse for our outro music. Peggy Shunning for managing our Facebook page. And remember to like us on Facebook for all the latest UFO news. You can check us out next week right here on the Dark Matter Radio Network and every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Thank you. Keep your eyes to the sky.